Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of, well, Nathan Reacts, I guess. Because until I can get the gaming part of it functioning. But, yeah. Welcome back to another episode where today we are looking at Humanity is the Worst Warhammer Race to Live As by Pancreas No Work. So, I'm not too sure what the Empire of Man is like compared to the Imperium of Man in 40k. Not sure what the particular differences are. I know that there's a lot of knights. There's a gun. There's some guns in here. I know that it's becoming more industrial rather than like strictly fantasy as time goes on with this setting. But I also know that a lot of people have very funny mustaches sometimes in a few instances, but otherwise it's my knowledge on the intricacies of how the races of what the races are like and how they function is very sparse. What better way to start than looking at the Empire of Man under Sigmar and a few, like, and as well as just like the current lore, like the current king that's ruling over the Empire currently. But yeah, just go ahead and get right into it. Be sure to like, subscribe, go support the original video, and yeah, let's get into it.
Well, this video did well. Time to ride its coattails. Selling my values for money. Whoop whoop. Nah, for real though. Have you ever thought about how much it sucks to be a human in one of the Warhammer settings? Seriously, being isekai'd into one of the Warhammer human empires, be it 40k or fantasy or Age of Sigmar, would be absolutely miserable. I'm talking.
I know some people would have said before that, oh, it'd be kind of cool to be in these places. Like, no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. Why would you want to be in these places? Like, I get the idea of it is cool. I get that some of these places would be kind of cool, like if you were to be put into, if you were to be magically put into the particular factions you think are cool or interesting, but even then, there are going to be things about it you are not going to like at the fuck all. But yeah. No, I would not want to live in these fucking settings. Are you kidding me? These places are fucking nightmares.
Talking constant pain and despair for 99.999999% of people. That's 8 nines. That's as many nines as my first gamer tag had. I was like 10, leave me alone. Honestly though, sometimes people will say that humanity in these settings, particularly 40k, doesn't really have it that bad, and that for the average person, things are looking pretty alright. And I have to say, I really disagree for a number of reasons.
This audio is a little different. I'm assuming this is an older video, ain't it? Yeah, 3 years ago. It's a fairly old video.
Sucks to be a human being there. It sucks hard. Let me tell you why. First off, fantasy. I mean, it's pretty simple here. In Bretonnia, for starters, because I love shitting on Bretonnia, you're a medieval serf as a default state of being. You wake up, you farm, you repair roads in your thatched hut with one room in it. 2, if you're an extremely wealthy peasant. You share this hut with your farm animals because there's no affording a barn for them. Again, you're a medieval serf and everything is owned by the lord of the land. You pay the vast majority of the food you grow and any things you make to said lord in exchange for security and land, because medieval life was a nationwide protection racket in fancy armor. And the lords treat you like absolute dog shit. You should be honored if one of them walks all over you like a rug, because that means the lord paid attention to you long enough to do so. If you're really lucky, you might be cannon fodder in one of their wars. And if you're lucky enough to be a Bretonian noble, it isn't much better because you're still at a medieval standard of living. Things like modern medicine and refrigeration or germ theory are at best crazy talk, and at worst going to get someone killed for being a chaos cultist. Sure, you get to feast a lot as a noble, but that's still barely anything. Do you know how much flavor is in that bag of chips you're eating? A single Dorito chip would kill someone from medieval times. They'd go into shock. Why do you think things like salt and pepper were so goddamn valuable back then? Food was crap. I swear.
That's funny because the last I heard, the United Kingdom was United Kingdom Britain was in fact the head of the spice trade, and yet they have by far the biggest shit flown in their direction because their food is just god awful, and they like to put beans on everything, which even I kind of wonder that, like, why do you put beans on everything? Why beans on toast? Who puts beans on toast? Anyways, yeah.
It's not just the ogre in me talking, the stuff was bland as hell. If you're a human in Bretonnia, you're gonna be in for a shit time if you aren't lucky enough to drink the Lady of the Lake's gamer girl bathwater. And even then, you still have to deal with all the trash living conditions around you. You just get magically healed and live a little longer. If I shot you in the heart but it magically healed, you'd still be in pain even if you don't die from it. And the Empire of Man, isn't much better. The common folk aren't treated quite as poorly, but that's offset by the fact that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences are right around the corner for them. The good old massive wealth inequality, horrible factory conditions, and other things like horrid and squalid living conditions that made Karl Marx write that little book of his. So at best, the Empire of Man's citizens can look forward to a communist revolution in their future, even disregarding that whole end times business. Same deal for Imperial nobles as Bretonnian nobles, only they don't even get the Lady of the Lake's piss jar for magical health and life extension. Did you know that in the Gotrek and Felix novels, Felix is treated by a doctor and is shocked when the doctor doesn't use leeches in the Four Humors School of Medicine? That's what these people have to look forward to. I almost
You know, it's interesting that it brings them up because that is going to be the next thing I shall react to at some point here. It's literally on the list.
welcome to Black Death compared to that. And if you live in either of those two countries, you sure as hell are gonna have to deal with the plague every now and then. Nippon sure exists, and that's all I can really say for it. Same for Araby, so who the fuck knows what's going on there? I'm assuming these countries have the same living situations as above, but I guess I can't say for certain. Telea is right next to Skavenblight, so add all the fun of being a Renaissance-era peasant combined with the fact you live next to these things. Doesn't he look like a friendly neighbor? The border princes are the same as Telea, only instead of Skaven, it's orcs. And Cathay lives by the ogres, who sometimes like to come out of the mountains and devour a town or 12 for lunch. Beyond that, I'm willing to bet that it's mostly the same as the Empire and or Bretonnia, only with the added benefit that they're based on Chinese history. So I can only imagine at least one city in Cathay has had its occupants eaten by the military after rations ran out during a siege. God, I love Chinese history. Oh, and of course humanity has to deal with the occasional raid by
Well, I mean, Chinese history seems interesting. I got more so into Japanese history, really. I like their traditions. Their weird focus on traditions it's debatable, and how effective it is, you know, after long periods, because, you know, old traditions kind of, they're like bad habits. They just tend to die very, very slow and very, very, uh, hard-ish, so to speak. But, yeah, I like Japanese history in particular. I feel like the Japanese aesthetic is pretty cool. I've always liked samurais. I've always liked the sort of like honor and warriors code and the ethics that they had back in those times. I thought it made them stand out from most other cultures.
beastmen, or Vikings, or rat people with machine guns, or elves looking to add to the pile of rape slaves in their dungeon, or elves who are theoretically on their side, but the humans had the gall to ask why an army of elves suddenly showed up in their border, so of course the elves had to defend themselves from this wanton act of aggression, or attacks from their dwarven allies because 1,000 years ago one particular human's ancestor accidentally shorted a dwarf 2 silver pieces in a trade deal, so obviously the whole county had to go, or mushrooms. And for this video, unlike the ogres, I'll compare them to the other fantasy races so you can really appreciate how suck human lives are. First off, they're close neighbors, the dwarfs. I'm not screwing with you, dwarfs in fantasy have a damn near perfect immune system. It's brought up in, once more, Gotrek and Felix. The dwarfs were doing the thing where they complain about everything, including humans being weak compared to them. Felix got some good comebacks in though, so that was neat. But anyway, yeah, as a dwarf, you're not getting sick, so for living conditions, that's pretty fucking insane. Hygiene just isn't an issue. But beyond that, their lives are pretty comfy. Or at least comfy in the sense that they care about. Dwarf holds are pretty damn nice. Sure, they deal with invading orcs and ratmen, but that's everyone. If everything's going well, they're damn near impregnable in a siege. And the dwarfs, while also in the stage of the Industrial Revolution, are so obsessed with things working right and following OSHA protocols that their factories, for one, aren't run by child labor, and two, they don't run the risk of cutting off some poor bastard's fingers because the owners couldn't be bothered to turn a machine off while it's getting fixed. Sure, if you fuck up, you have to join the death cult, but even then, there's nothing stopping a dwarf from living his best life and drinking and singing across the world's taverns on his way to find something big and scary enough to kill him. They also live pretty damn long, so you'll have plenty of chances to enjoy life. The dwarfs are also a simple people. Love me mines, love me ale, love me grudgin', simple as. If you're a dwarf, it's easy to be content. If you're a human, you're probably miserable. How about the elves? Well, high elves for starters just use magic to fix everything that goes wrong, so disease is again a non-issue. Even Teclis with its magical bloodline curse just fixes it with some potions. Beyond that, it's similar to the dwarfs, with everything being comfy on Ulthuan in a more traditional sense rather than the dwarven sense of
I don't know anything about that Tekla situation, but sounds bad.
it works, so we're happy with it. They are depressed as a race because of how far they've fallen, but being sad because Grandpa was better than you is something I'll take over working at a weapons factory in Nuln, where the safety rules are to have fun and try not to fall in the molten metal they use to form the cannons. As for
I mean, when has the elves never had a fall from grace in these settings at this point? I feel like that Warhammer setting is just not really complete if the elves didn't fuck it up somewhere down the line. I feel like most fantasy stories, right, focus on this same sort of aspect of it, right? Like the elves from Mur and Tamri, you know, like the Tamriel like elves are just as god awful in Elder Scrolls. Like they have a lot of like culture. and they have the Aldmeri Dominion. They have a lot of cool things going for them, but they often let their ego get in the way of their ability to diplomacy, and you know, a lot of the fucking problems that arise due to that. They're also not above using whatever means that they think is necessary in order to get the power and the positions that they want. I mean, it's one of the reasons why they enslave the cat people, among other things, because why the hell not? It's a yeah. It's the elves in fiction are usually go two types of ways, and most of the time they're either like they're prideful to the point of being snobs, or they're wise enough to where they actually have some sense to them, but ultimately still end up making a shit ton of mistakes as a result of it. You know, like they're either really high spec in intelligence or they're high spec in wisdom, and the wisdom comes from experience. And so elves tend to fuck up a lot more than they actually succeed, possibly, potentially. And so they pass along a lot of their warnings and their sort of like tales of failures more than they do anything else. There are some interesting fictions that go into these types of like elven stories. I feel like that if you were to write elves in a fantasy fiction these days, you know, like there's definitely some interesting sort of like ways you could portray them, interesting ways you could certainly utilize them. And while I definitely have my own ideas, and I had some ideas for like an elven race in one of my own stories, um, they ultimately never really went anywhere because I never really gotten that book published. But it's you know, like the way I was gonna envision how I would do it is that, you know, just like the elves from Warhammer, before I even knew what the fuck Warhammer even was, um, I had my elves basically like they were at the height of not just magic but also of magical industry. Like they were essentially the heads of like they were the premier race of that particular world, of that particular sort of setting, and they eventually went on to create the humans. And how I was going to portray it was that the humans, after several centuries and eons, they would eventually forget their own upbringing and they would live under the assumption that they, you know, like that there are that the gods created them and that they basically are the ancestors, or they're probably like this, or they were probably made in the images of these particular gods. But in actuality, it was the elves that made them. They had made them through gene splicing from mixing animal DNA among their own, and a few other things, and they did it for the purposes of making readily, easily affordable manual labor. The other aspect of it, of course, is because they also had some actual hopeful sort of like, you know, I'm getting into a bit of a tangent about my own story. I don't need to do that. Sorry. Let's not do that. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting directions you could take with fantasy elves, as well as just elves in general. They're egoists, and they don't have to be egoists, but they have a lot of sort of like mystique and intrigue uh to their into their inclusion in any type of story that, you know, makes them, that kind of elevates the set, you know, like the story and the setting a bit in a way to where it's like, ah, there's actually some cool stuff in here potentially. There might be some interesting stories or some interesting sort of like legends or tales or some shit that might be woven into this, or there might be some things that the elves do that could be that have interesting ramifications for other races, because usually whenever elves get up to some fuck shit, it usually never goes very well for most other people, because it's usually cataclysmic, but that's neither here or there. Point being, I like elves in fantasy. I like elves in most fictions. I think they add an interesting flavor to things, and, you know, and not just whatever DeviantArt will make of it, but, you know, that's just my 2 cents on that. That's just neither here or there.
For the Dark Elves, well, yeah, they don't have the best living conditions for a lot of them, but the Druchii don't give a shit about comfort. One of the buildings in Total Warhammer 2 says as much. They just care about getting slaves and murdering things. Slaves, which of course are usually human, so there's another mark against mankind in these shithole worlds. And the Wood Elves? I have no fucking idea, man. They live in Atholloran, which is absolutely insane, but the forest likes them so they get to have magical woodland fairy lives instead of being murdered by Ents. Except sometimes the Ents still murder them because they're angry at them for whatever reason. Also, they sometimes hold hunts where they run down Bretonnian citizens for a laugh. It really sucks to be Bretonnian. Of course, the Wood Elves never really complain about it, and I'm pretty sure the average Wood Elf is also batshit insane, so they don't care about these downsides. Use some magic and your mundane problems are gone, and any other problems they don't see as problems. Yeah, of course the Dryad feast on my entrails. That just happens in Atholloran, you know? I'm still living it up. I made a whole video on why ogre lives are great, so if you want that explanation, here it is. No, I don't have any shame. Thank you for asking. From what I gathered, Age of Sigmar is more...
I wish I could be as much of a shill, but I'm not typically a shill. I don't know why. I just don't feel comfortable wanting to show myself or really wanting to advertise myself too much. Like, I feel like it's just, if I were to do that, I feel like I'm kind of grifting. And I'm not really about grifting. I just like to enjoy things. I just like to talk about things. If people like it, so be it. If not, whatever. It's not a big deal. You know, like, I treat this channel and I treat the way I do things on these on social media platforms of this type of variety as content creation as a form of just like me exercising my ability to be my best self, to engage and discuss things in a manner that people might find interesting or maybe not. I don't know. I do it for socializing purposes, to be to better kind of like compare and contrast my actual self versus how other people, like kind of see where people like how they receive me for me, and not so much like, how other people around me or the people in my life that I know particularly see me, because I just don't really see some of the things that I have to say, or some of the opinions that I might have, right, really sitting well for some people. And so I kind of just like to gauge and kind of contrast to see like how my actual self and my actual opinions fare in the court of public opinion, so to speak, right? Because I feel like I probably have opinions that people don't like. I feel like I would have opinions that people would probably think are pretty neat or probably fairly interesting, or at least they, like if at the very least it's people could be under, like they're understanding or sympathetic to the things that are opinions that I have, whatever the hell it is, have mind you, like it's. I feel like that it's just the way I do things. I like to just discuss, engage in regular discourse in a way that's like in a manner of which that affords me the ability to, not get completely overblown with the problem and issues that is, people knowing who I am and then having a lot of those things kind of blow up in my face. Maybe it ruins certain relationships because people are spineless these days. I don't fucking know. I also just don't want to deal with the possible ramifications of having to deal with certain people if they don't like the things that I have to say, especially when it comes to certain particular issues. But yeah, that's just how I feel about it. Anyways, sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there. Let's continue.
or less the same for the average person, only with the added benefit of whatever you live in being miserable in its own unique way. Do you live in Akshi? I hope you don't mind 120-degree heat 24/7. I know there's one city in the realm of life that's industrializing so horribly that it chokes the surrounding area with smog 24/7, so there's that one too. Or you could live in the realm of beasts, where you have to contend with the mountain you live on actually being a giant angry turtle. God, these settings suck for the average person. The only race with a worse standard of living than humanity are the Skaven. I was going to try to justify that the Skaven in a way don't have it as bad as humanity, but even I couldn't bring myself to do that. I will say, however, that humans and rats have very different mindsets about living situations. Specifically, the rats always have the grind set. Every Skaven, from the lowliest slave to the Grey Seers, think they're the best and they just have to work their way up to being in total control to guide the Skaven to victory. Most of them are wrong, of course, but they still believe this, and they're so ambition-driven that their position in life is almost irrelevant to them beyond what it allows them to have access to and get away with. So no, the Skaven certainly aren't living better than humans, but it also definitely doesn't bother them as much as an equivalent living situation would a human. Rats stay winning. Now for 40k, and this is the one I wanted to talk about the most because a lot of people seem to think that humanity is living its best life here if they aren't actively in a war zone. It isn't. Humanity in 40k is miserable. It's slaving away in service to a corpse on a throne in miserable conditions where it will receive almost nothing in exchange for lifelong servitude. But
I mean, this was 3 years ago, so a lot of people who are probably asking these questions have no idea about anything with Warhammer or the 40k version of any sort. They're probably just being like, oh, it must be really nice to live in these type of settings. They have all this advanced technology, all these other things going on. It's not. It really isn't. I think from a glance, you can certainly be forgiven for thinking this way, but I definitely would are once you actually look at the seams, you start to notice all the cracks and crevices. You're going to start to see that this little canvas is actually got a lot of problems to it. It's practically falling apart.
40k, there's loads of different specific worlds to look at for exactly why it sucks to be a human. If you live on a pleasure world, I will grant you that life is probably good. Even as a servant, you're still on a pleasure world. Life isn't that bad when your job is being a butler in the Garden of Eden. Oh no, my weekends are spent relaxing at the beach and drinking martinis all day long. How do I do it? But pleasure worlds are rare. They are such a small fraction of planets in the Imperium of Man that they're barely worth mentioning. Truth be told, I only brought them up because I need to get the argument against my points out of the way first. If that makes me an asshole, then that's up to you to decide. For the suck, let's go to the civilized worlds. A lot of people say that they're equivalent of, a modern-day first world country. And I will admit that in the Caiaphas Cain books, some of the times when Cain is wandering a planet looking for ways to avoid the war zone he's supposed to be a part of, these worlds don't look like the worst places to live. This viewpoint isn't wrong, but it also isn't telling the whole story. They're roughly the equivalent of Earth as it is now, plus or minus a few hundred years of technology. So you could live in the world that's modern-day Germany or America. Or you could live in the equivalent of a colonial world where one part of the world controls the rest of it. The Imperium doesn't care if that's the case. You may be slaving away on a sugar plantation, but as long as the guard gets its tith, then it isn't going to do shit. Or you could live on the planet of sweatshop factories that has just little levels of pollution to not count as a forge world. Technically counts as a civilized world, but tell that to the factory workers making ultramarine plushies for the system a few light years over for their entire lives. But even in the most wonderful civilized world, you aren't living the ideal 1950s suburban American community without all the society problems ending with the suffix phobia, or ism. You're living in the world of the man in the high castle, or given that it's Warhammer, Wolfenstein land is probably more accurate. Your government dictates how you think, how you work, and how you live in general. Sure, it can be more subtle on these planets, but your life is still completely at the whim of the Imperium. Your religious beliefs are decided for you. If you bring up that perhaps this religion everyone is following has a few flaws, then you are going to be blackbagged before you can finish the sentence. It is a veneer of pleasantry hiding the fact that you are living in the most horrid dictatorship ever. Wonder why Bobby stopped showing up at the country club? Well, you shouldn't, because Bobby never existed, and if you bring him up again, you're going to the same place he did. Just because in a civilized world you aren't actively having the Imperium's boot step on your throat doesn't mean it's a wonderful life. In fact, it's still a shitty life. The Imperium is just doing its best to make sure you don't realize it. Just because you have a decently comfy bed to return to at night doesn't mean you live a good life. Your human rights are still being viciously violated, and not knowing about that fact doesn't make it better. It's worth remembering that the Imperium is a...
It's funny because we're getting closer and closer to a potential world in reality as of the recording of this video. That, we seem to be edging closer into that type of weird sort of tyrannical dictatorship. We're getting into that sort of, nebulous realm of the states getting to control what you can and can say, what you can and cannot say, and, what you can and cannot do. We're getting to that point. And I guarantee you that the moment we start really encroaching on that space is the moment that we're going to eventually have to come to a decision as a society, whether the government likes it or not, if whether or not we're actually going to do something about it. And honestly, regardless of whether we actually do something about it or we just, whatever happens, happens, like, I'm not going to say that I like the idea of a potential civil war or war type of scenario happening. It's the last thing we want, but I know that I've said this before plenty of times on the channel, things are often going to get a lot worse before they ever get better. So I don't hold anything. I don't hold anything off of the table. I don't think there's no card that humanity won't use to kind of push the boundaries of what they can get away with. Companies do it all the time. We just had payment processors try to do it earlier. Like if there are people who are just bored enough, who have just a certain level of power and they think they can abuse it and get away with it, because they're fucking losers and they have nothing better to do with their fucking time other than just be absolute fucking pieces of shit, then yeah, they're gonna do it. And what are we gonna do to stop it? Well, we're either going to very literally tell them to stop it, or we're gonna viscerally tell them to stop it. And let me tell you, I don't think nobody wants to see the visceral end of that stick. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. because it's going to become another Luigi Mangione situation, and we won't know just how many Luigis there will be in such a future. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that. So yeah, moving on.
A nightmare. It's not a good place. It is repeatedly stated to be corrupt and incompetent and ruthless and nightmarish and several other negative adjectives. I mean, hell, Games Workshop has said as much directly on multiple occasions. 40k also has the added benefit over fantasy that your government can decide, oh, this planet needs to go, and burn you and your world to kingdom come. Mini rant over. What about agricultural worlds? Gotta be a nice planet-wide farm, right? That sounds relaxing. Well, the Imperium is such a mess of technological levels that yes, some are probably like that, but then you're just back to being a Bretonian serf with the knowledge that sometimes big metal birds come from the sky to take your food. Otherwise, you live on a planet that's constantly dealing with fertilizer runoff and is being kept just ecologically clean enough to keep all the food production from dying out. These places suck. Hive worlds, good god, they're awful. They're not having you work 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. That level of grimdark is too stupid for me to push as fact. But what is fact is that you live in an apartment most people would consider to be a closet at best. You have no privacy because your walls are shared with 10 other people, half of whom are actually part of your family. The building you live on is also 10,000 years old and hasn't been maintained in 5,000, so have fun with the occasional structural collapse taking a small country's worth of people down with it. Pollution is a given, so have fun breathing an atmosphere of 20% carbon dioxide and God knows what else. Oh, and
Damn.
chances are you live so far beneath the quote-unquote surface of the hive world that not only have you never seen the sun, but you may not have even heard of it. If you're educated exactly enough to know how much to work in the factory that has never heard of something like a guardrail, much less actual hazard equipment and training. Oh, and the farther you go down in the hive, the worse it gets, somehow. You've got mutants, chaos cults, gene sealer cults, fanatical cults of the Emperor, which you would think would be on your side until they murder you and your family for breathing in a way that they think is unholy, and waterfalls of factory waste that turn not only the lower levels of the hive, but the areas surrounding it into places that are somehow worse than the rest of it. On a hive world, your life is miserable. Just because you aren't working 24/7 in a factory making guns doesn't mean you're just hanging around chilling out. Just because you get a lunch break in hell doesn't mean you aren't in hell. Also, this is more of a personal belief of mine, so feel free to accept or ignore this part at your leisure, but even though hive worlds are a minority of planets in the Imperium, I genuinely think they make up at least 50% of the people in it. They have trillions of people on them, if not more. Some of the things I've read place that number in the quadrillions. That many people on one planet is going to cause nothing but squalor, unrest, and countless other problems at all times. If I'm right about what percentage of humanity is located on hive worlds, then that means being born a human in 40k means you'll most likely be placed in one of these shit pits. If I'm wrong, then these places are still absolute hellholes to live in. Let's run through the rest of the worlds real quick because I feel like I've made my point. If you live on a fair world, then you're just a caveman, so yeah, that sucks. If you think a death world is great to live on and you would totally survive there, then I have nothing else to say to you that would convince you otherwise, you silly little larper you. Forge worlds are like hive worlds, only so polluted that if you aren't augmented to
I mean, I feel like that, it's a death world. At least you know what you're getting into. At least you'll be a little. At least you'll know you'll fucking die at some point. Like, at least the finality of your death won't be a question. It won't be an uncertainty. It'll be a given. It'll just be definite. Like, you even so much as relax for even a second. That's potentially you finally kicking the bucket. I feel like there's a certainty in that.
survive on them, or a tech priest who's already 80% machine anyways, you can't even breathe on the things. Fortress worlds are like Cadia, so your life is going to be nothing but constant military service or working to feed the military in horrid factory conditions, only this time you're probably going to be the target of some invading army or other every few weeks. Night worlds have all the fun
True.
of feudalism crossed with robots. Sure, it probably looks cool, but I wouldn't want to live there. And while they may be rarely populated, if you're unfortunate enough to live on or even near a demon world, they're called demon worlds. Do you really need me to explain that one? All in all, being a human sucks in 40k even more than it does in fantasy. The one thing I can say for humanity is that if you're part of the elite, your life is probably great. Life extending treatments, luxurious living, power over the masses, the works. But that's such a small percentage of people that I don't even think I can say that they're the 1%. They're the 1% of the 1% because most of the top 1% is only considered such because they get a piece of bread that isn't moldy in their weekly rations. Even living as a superhuman in 40k still sucks. Space Marines are constantly fighting horrid wars, and depending on which chapter you are, you may or may not have degenerative DNA inserted into you. Hope you have fun turning into a rage monster who thinks everyone around him is named Horus, and since this just seems to escape the mind of most people, don't forget that intense indoctrination are explicitly part of Space Marine training. I know the word gets used so often in 40k that it loses all meaning, but please remember that indoctrination is a bad thing. Also, the benefits you do
I mean, I feel like that should go without saying, but some people do surprise you, I will admit. But yeah. I mean, then again, if you're that stupid enough to where you just believe everything you see and are told in fiction, then you probably aren't exactly cognizant or even self-aware, or even just have the mental fortitude, mental fortitude to basically be able to make your own decisions to begin with. So, as far as I'm concerned, you know, I mean, I don't think there needs to be anything else said. Weed yourself out of the gene pool.
We get from being a space marine are almost irrelevant because there's roughly one space marine per planet in the Imperium. Yeah, I know that some chapters have more than just 1,000 marines, but it's still such a small fraction of people that you aren't going to be one, let alone someone like a Custodes. All of this, of course, is on top of the fact that every time someone blinks, Xenos or Chaos invade another world. And compare this to the other races. The Tau actually have pretty decent standards of living. Not always great, given that there's pretty prevalent propaganda, but it's still better than the Imperium. Mind control is the lesser evil compared to nuking your own planet. The Eldar live in a perfect post-scarcity society when they aren't fighting, so that's that. Yeah, their souls are forfeit upon death, but in day-to-day life, they're having a fine go with things. Orcs only care about fighting, and they're always fighting, so they're in heaven, same as in fantasy. Tyranids do not have the capacity to care about these things, so who cares? I don't think the High Fleets have an existential crisis every time they devour a world. Dark Eldar are more or less the same as the Dark Elves. Their souls do drain away, but solving that issue is incredibly easy. Just stab the nearest slave in the throat and your agony quota is fulfilled. Have your soul back. There's peril and despair in Kamara, but there's equal amounts of debauchery and the fun kind of mayhem, so I'm still willing to place humanity below them on the quality of life scale. If you ask the common Necron what it thinks about its living situation, it's just going to look at you blankly because the average Necron warrior doesn't have the ability to think about that kind of thing. Their nobles might be sad about not having souls or working sexual organs anymore, but they're also immortal and incredibly powerful beings who can come back from death, so it could certainly be worse. Hell, depending on their interests, not being organic might be a good thing to them. Raisin, for example, has until the heat death of the universe to collect things because of it. Overall, yeah, Life is Humanity sucks in 40k. Life is Humanity sucks in the Warhammer settings in general. Don't be a human in these settings if you had a choice. Also, I'm employing the all lore is canon, not everything is true defense, except my interpretation of the setting is definitely the correct one in this case, so you are certainly wrong and I am right because I have the YouTube channel, so I get to make the rules. I am not 5 years old, I am 6. Thank you, of course, to my channel members for generously donating their funds to support me. May your pancreases never falter in their sacred duty. Thank you all for watching, and take care out there.
Is that like his end channel slogan that he dropped at some point? Because I haven't heard him say that before. Yeah, I probably should just let him run through.
Humanity in 40k also doesn't have access to Karl Franz, so quite frankly, they lose by default. No, I'm not going to stop making this joke. It isn't a joke. I want Karl Franz's dick. You know, usually in a story where the hero or heroes are down on their luck, it usually means something like in...
Alright, shut up. There we go. Alright. That was funny. That is funny. He really does like that guy. He really does like Karl Franz. I don't know anything about him. Maybe I should look up a video about Karl Franz. That's the next thing I should do. That's the next thing I'll look up next is Karl Franz. I'll look up a Karl Franz video. Whether it's by Pancreas or somebody else. But yeah. That was Humanity is the worst Warhammer race.
Well, this video did well. Time to ride its coattails. Selling
Is the worst Warhammer race to live as by Pancreas No Work. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been an interesting video, I gotta say. There was a few things in here that I thought were just focused on fantasy. I thought it was just gonna focus mainly on fantasy, but it ended up going broadly spoken about both fantasy and 40k, which, you know, to be granted, there's a lot of interesting details and information in here to really pick apart. I will definitely give them that. Yeah, no. If nothing else, this is a really great case of just really showcasing, you know, it's not great to live as one of these races. It really isn't. All races are fucked. Technically, right? Humanity's fucked in particular. But so is, you know, all the other races like the Skaven, the Drukhari are particularly a very special kind of fucked. There's so many problems in the Warhammer settings that you know, it's basically like a death by 1,000 cuts type of situation. It's actually no different from our own modern day. Now that you think about it, there's just so many problems that the idea of wanting to solve and fix them is an impossibility. Like, you can't solve and fix these problems because there's too many fucking, like, red tape, bureaucracy, civil unrest, retarded people in charge of making decisions, among other things, to really get anything done. and everyone seems to have their own idea of how to do everything, and so everyone's working counter to everybody else because, and no, instead of just solving the problems that they're seeing, they're just having giant, massive dick measuring pissing contests to see who's going to actually have the best idea to fix the problem the best and the hardest. I don't know. It's a really just one massive cluster of circle jerking that I just do not care for. It's one of the reasons why I want nothing to do with society. I am totally comfortable in being isolated and only focusing on myself, never having to worry about other people. And having to focus and worry about other people outside of my immediate vicinity is, I mean, that's just such a monumental hurdle in itself. But I applaud people who actually want to genuinely try doing that, certainly. But anyways, yeah, that was that video. Thank you all so much for watching. Please go support the original video. Pancreas No Work is a great creator. And though I wish I could find other videos that focus on Warhammer Fantasy, that isn't just Pancreas, because I don't want to feel like I'm mooching off of his content too hard. I feel it seems like he has pretty much a good monopoly on this particular facet of Warhammer, so I guess it's just gonna be mostly reacting to Pancreas until, otherwise when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy. I know that Major Kill has some videos, I know that some other people have some videos on Warhammer Fantasy, but yeah, that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.